Thank you so much. It's so great to see you all tonight, especially since we had the bombshell of general election announcement last week. I know some people are starting to campaign and canvass for the election, so it's really good to see people joining us today. I'm Clara Paylard. I am the co-founder of the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus, which is a rank-and-file network within Unite the Union, which is trying to push more radical policies in terms of the climate crisis. I'm also a Unite branch secretary for the not-for-profit sector in Merseyside, and I work for Tipping Point UK, who's helped organize the meeting tonight. Thank you very much also for the Climate Justice Coalition and other climate justice groups who have supported us to be able to put this meeting together. This is a very important online rally tonight because it's bringing together climate justice groups to build support for the steel workers in Port Talbot. The transition has started, and so far it is not just. Under the cover of functioning their coal blast furnaces, Tata Steel is threatening almost 3,000 workers with redundancies. And this is only the beginning. We are likely to see the same model reproduced across the country and across a range of pollutive industries. So it's crucial that the climate movement join forces with workers and their unions to ensure that workers don't pay the price of the ecological transition. Tonight, we'll first hear from Jason Wyatt, who is a Unite rep at Port Talbot. I'm really pleased that Jason is with us tonight. We met a few weeks back in Manchester, and yeah, I'm delighted that Jason is here to tell us a little bit more about this dispute and the sort of like climate ecological transition dimension of it. Jason will be followed by 5 shorter contributions from across the movement. We'll hear for Claire Peden from the Unite for Workers Economy, who has worked on the campaign and promoted the Unite Workers Plan for Port Talbot. We'll hear for Jan Hines, a local resident of Port Talbot with family ties to the steelworks. Jan is a frontline support worker and active with XR Cymru, or XR Wales if you don't speak Welsh. She'll be followed by Ellen Robottom, who is from the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group. Ellen is one of the authors of the Climate Job Strategy and from Unite Community branch in Leeds. She's also done some research into green steel technologies. John Morrissey will follow. He's the Unite Chair and Environmental Rep for Swansea Unite Community branch. And both John and Ellen are active in the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus. And last but not least, Morten Thijssen from NEON, the New Economy Organizers Network, who is working on the issue of just transition. Once we hear from the speakers, there will be a time for question and answers, and we're asking people, given the number of people here, to try to put their questions in the chat. We'll see how we go with time in terms of contributions. And hopefully we will also start exploring tonight ideas for the next steps in planning the support as a climate justice movement for Port Talbot steelworkers who are preparing for industrial action in the coming period. We want to make sure their voices are heard and backed up by the climate justice movement just before a general election. So at this point, that's enough for me, and I'm going to invite Jason to address our rally.
Thank you very much for that introduction. So, can everybody hear me okay?
Perfect, Jason.
Yeah, no worries, happy days. Right, so before I start, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all of you for attending tonight and giving up some time to listen to me talk about the current plight of our steel industry and explain a little bit around the necessity of the steel industry in a green economy. So as been pointed out, I'm Jason Wyatt. I'm an electrical engineer in Port Talbot Steelworks. I work in the hot mill, and I'm a Unite the Union shop steward or workplace rep. I've been part of the steel industry since leaving school 25 years ago. Yeah, it's one of those jobs that on my first day, the guys around you sort of congratulate you and tell you, well done, boys, you've got a job for life. I started in Frontline Steelworks in 1999. And by the time I finished my apprenticeship in 2003, just 4 years later, all of the heavy end alarm had gone. Ebervale Steelworks had closed altogether. Whiteheads were downsizing and transferring to a different site. And I, along with 30 of my apprenticeship year, were transferred down to Port Talbot Steelworks. If you fast forward to today and look across the UK, we've seen cuts and closures in Ravenscraig, Redcar, Teesside, Rotherham, Scunthorpe, Port Talbot and Newport, just to name a few. Quite simply, our steel industry is under attack. We are right now standing at the precipice, and there are effectively two paths in front of us. On the one hand, we've got Tata in the government and their industrial vandalism looking to directly decimate 2,800 livelihoods between Port Talbot and Lamwyn, and around 10,000 more jobs indirectly around the area, all whilst receiving £500 million from the government in funding. On the other hand, we've got what we've described as our fairer transition to electric arc furnace technology and investment to grow the whole UK green steel industry for the future. We've witnessed generations of degradation of industry in this country and the huge reduction of highly skilled and well-paid jobs that have gone with it in the process. All across the UK, all we've seen are cuts, particularly in heavy industry. Coal mines, shipyards, automotive plants, steelworks. It's the same story over and over again. Communities across the UK, like the one I grew up in, have been left in destitution. Tata and our politicians talk of transition funds and support for affected people, businesses and communities. These same promises have been made to ex-mining communities and ex-steel communities before. Ebervale are more than 20 years down the line from the closure of their steel industry, and they're still one of the most deprived communities in the country. The transition funds and investment either don't come to fruition or don't make a difference to the ordinary working class people like us in those areas. Steel is a foundation industry in the UK, whether we like it or not. Steel plays a massive part in all our lives, from the cars we drive, the knives and forks we use to eat, the glasses we wear on our faces, or the buildings, office blocks and factories we work in. They're all made using steel. But the market is changing, and our customers want to be able to sell their products with a badge saying made with green steel. For us in Port Talbot, it means transitioning to a format where steel is made using an electric arc furnace rather than our traditional blast furnaces. Now, for clarity, we're not opposing the building of an electric arc furnace to produce green steel. The most important thing to us, and what we as a workforce are opposing, is the way in which we transition to that electric arc furnace model. Port Talbot is the last bastion of heavy industry in South Wales. We've been there for over 100 years. We've absorbed some of the displaced workers when other industries in South Wales have gone. But we really are the last bastion of heavy industry in South Wales. The question is, where will we go? Where will my 2,000 brothers and sisters in the steel industry go? We as a workforce have bent over backwards every time we've been called on to save our industry. We've given up pay, we've given up terms and conditions, we've given up bonuses. And in 2016, we gave up our pension scheme, with the government then changing the rules around final salary schemes to allow Tata as a company to absolve themselves of all responsibility to the pension scheme and its members. That was worth more than £2 billion to Tata. Time and time again, we've answered the call. Now we're being asked to pay for our future, for our kids' futures, with jobs, and it's not fair. We've heard stories of the plant falling apart, of it being in an unsafe condition. This is only the result of years of underinvestment by our owners and the managed decline of our assets. We've already seen the accelerated closure of our coke ovens. These were the last coke ovens in the UK, and every ounce of coke the UK uses from now on will have to be imported. Without us fighting and government intervention, the rest of the heavy end will go the same way. Tata Steel made £3 billion EBIT and £900 million net profits in 2022-2023. It has reserves of over £1.6 billion and has paid out dividends of £1.4 billion between 2019 and 2023. Their revenue has grown by 47% over the last 5 years, and their holding company described 2023 as their best year ever. They really are a very rich company. We're fighting for a fair transition where we retain one blast furnace operation, at least until the electric arc furnace is brought online. This would mean that we would not have to rely on imported steel from halfway around the world, steel that is still produced using blast furnaces, but where those blast furnaces are far more carbon intensive than ours. We could continue to be self-sufficient, and we'd have a guaranteed steel supply for our hot mill and downstream operations, preserving jobs for the future and massively changing the numbers of redundancies we would see. This is a realistic and achievable transition. It's a transition that is a reality in the Chinese-owned British Steel plant in Scunthorpe. It is a reality in the Tata plant in Peden in Holland, and it is a reality in our competitors' plants across Europe. And whilst Tata are closing our blast furnaces, they're bringing them online in Holland and in India. The difference in all these cases is the support from the owners and the respective governments. We are being failed by our owners and our governments. And speaking of governments, the Tories in London have gifted Tata £500 million of our taxpayers' cash to build the electric arc furnace, but with no guarantees around jobs or future. The government has shown they have absolutely no industrial strategy and no plan or vision for UK steel. When you consider that the total value of the UK steel industry is around £780 million, and the Labour Party have already pledged £3 billion, why wouldn't we take a stake in the UK steel industry? One swipe of a pen in Westminster can change procurement rules so that any UK infrastructure products using steel are made using our own UK steel. This alone will put billions back into the public purse. There are opportunities around the Freeport area in Port Talbot to try to attract businesses into the area. But we need more from our politicians. We need sure and definite policy around the Freeport area to be able to bring these businesses and to retain a highly skilled and well-paid employment in this area. And it needs to be now, not over the next 5 or 6 years. It'll be too late by then. There's been talk of electric vehicle battery plants and of offshore wind turbines. Why shouldn't they be manufactured and built in Port Talbot? We need our politicians to do more for us. Why aren't Tata listening to the Labour Party? Why aren't they considering the pledge of investment to the UK steel industry? Labour have openly told Tata not to make any irreversible decisions until after a general election. Why are Tata so hell-bent on pursuing this devastating plan? Steel is part of the long-term green economy in this country, whether it be in production of floating offshore wind turbine platforms, the wind turbine bodies, solar panel production, or even the factories these are all made in. Ultimately, the decisions lie with our politicians as to whether they want to support us so that we can utilise the plant, technology, workforce and materials available to us, and we can make it ourselves, or whether it's made somewhere else in the world and shipped in. Deindustrialisation is a political choice. It was a political choice in the 80s, and it's a political choice now. We've shown that there is an alternative. Our industry can and should be there as an opportunity for future generations, as it was there for me and my colleagues. The market for green steel is set to grow massively in the coming years. We can and should be there to meet that demand. With proper investment, we can grow the green steel industry. We can see more jobs, not fewer, more employment, not less, more prosperity and thriving communities, not the shells of communities that have been left across the UK as a result of deindustrialisation. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to take a few questions after the other speakers have had their turn, if anybody wants to ask me anything.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jason, for this really interesting contribution and making the clear link between your industry and the transition we need. I mean, I think crushing workers and their communities is a political choice. It was a political choice in the 80s, and it's now. Yep. I guess the difference is that they're now using the climate crisis as a justification, which is absolutely outrageous. And profit and capitalism is the problem.
That's exactly what's going on. So the 500 million that the Tories have gifted Tata with no sort of ties to it. they've got that by sort of justifying it with the green steel transition, carbon neutral targets and this, that, and the other. They haven't questioned anything around it then, and they're not going to affect. And like I said, to add insult to injury in that respect, then to have no guarantees around it with regards to jobs or futures, it's insulting.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for that, Jason. I'm now going to bring in Claire Peden from Unite for Workers Economy, which is a Unite section that is doing quite a lot of work in trying to put forward our industrial disputes and the voice of workers. So Claire's going to give us a bit more perspective about the bigger picture. And yeah, I'm really pleased that you've been able to be here, and thanks again for the support in helping to organize this event. Claire, the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. As Clara said, my name's Claire Peden, and I work for Unite the Union as part of the Unite for a Workers Economy campaign. I've had the privilege of working alongside Jason on the Support UK Steel campaign. And as Jason said, what's happening in Port Talbot is most definitely a political issue. I'll touch upon steel as we go on, but I just wanted to introduce what Unite for Workers Economy, how it was formed and what it stands for. So Unite for Workers Economy was launched in about 2022, and it was launched especially to focus on changing politics from the workplace to the community. So we were always quite good at organising industrially, but when people left the workplace, sometimes that ended, and we wanted to bridge that gap. And it was about taking political education back to basics, back into our communities, and finding different ways to engage with our communities, the communities that we live and that we work in. And we try and link up, and we do link up very well with other organisations, whether that's food pantries and food banks, community hubs, sports groups, fuel poverty groups, etc. And we work together and campaign on issues that matter to ordinary people like you and I. For example, in Glasgow, we led a campaign called Feed the Wains, and that campaign was to demand that school meal debt was wiped, to sort of ease the kind of pressure, the stigma of own money for feeding kids at school. And we did. We won that campaign, and it was a welcome reprieve for families. But campaigns like this have enabled us to drive meaningful change in our local communities, and provide practical sort of action to continue to build a collective and be ready to oppose further attacks on our livelihoods. Our campaigns range vastly from the Feed the Wains to a housing disrepair campaign in Crawley. We've done renationalise energy campaigns in Workington and Grimsby, oil and gas in Scotland, and as well as supporting Jason and his colleagues on the Support UK Steel campaign. And what we want from it is and we need is a proper, fully costed workers plan, a plan where steel has a bright future, green steel has a bright future, not a tick box exercise by the government, as Jason said, as they hand over £500 million to their mates. We want a fully funded plan with serious investment that takes advantage of the rising demand of green steel and pays for itself over the years. I think the cost was about £1.1 billion a year, would safeguard the existing employment and create thousands of jobs, decent jobs, union jobs for generations to come, and no more managed decline. And we want good jobs, we want affordable energy, we want a fair transition. I know Jason talked about this as well, but floating offshore wind farms, onshore wind manufacturing, blades, turbines, electrical equipment can all be made here, much more cost effective, much greener, and much more beneficial to our economy. So I'm not going to go into too much of the ins and outs of that, but I think events like this are critical to the movement moving forward. And I think too often we're kind of pitted against each other, climate activists, trade unionists, workers, the list goes on. And I always say, well, who's really to blame for our failing economy? And who's to blame for the lack of a real green transition? It's executives, it's investors, it's politicians who choose short-term profits and fat dividends over investing in our industries and our planet. And it's up to us to push out the truth about these greedy companies that are making money off people. Companies quite happy to see people starve and people freeze in their homes with no reason other than greed. And we know that profits of Unite have commissioned quite a few profiteering reports. We know that profits have spiralled out of control across the economy. And some of the worst offenders I'm just going to tell you about here include big banks, oil and gas, electricity generation, supermarkets and shipping companies. For example, electricity generation companies almost trebled their profit margins, up by 185%, highlighting the need for energy renationalisation. Meanwhile, the 4 big banks made $45 billion in 2022, 75% up from pre-pandemic margins. Absolutely astonishing. And I suppose what we try and do, and hopefully do it to an extent and continue to learn from it, is we use this information to organise and mobilise on a wider scale. We use the tools that we've got at our disposal to help change the narrative and to have honest discussions about why we're in the crisis and to understand who's responsible. And we need to continue to try and get the information to the right people in our communities. We do it in a variety of methods. Anyone that's been involved in any of our campaigns I'll know that. We do face-to-face, we do door knocking, we do street stalls, but we use other methods. We hold gigs, we do book launches as well, and it's just finding different ways to reach people that we don't necessarily reach through our trade union and activist contacts. And I think that we're also there to provide practical support to help people fight back against the rampant profiteering that is tearing us all apart. So part of our vision is to be part of the change, to help develop and be part of a sustainable progressive movement. And I really do hope so. And for too long, we've focused on party politics, as we say, the kind of short lens of the Labour Party. But there's nothing wrong with demanding more from those that are meant to represent us. And when they fail, we need to be strong enough to hold them to account. And that doesn't matter whatever their political colours are. And this can only work with strong workplaces and strong communities. The right is united in their disdain for the working class. Yet day in, day out, we watch as working class people tear each other apart and fight amongst themselves, blaming each other for those less fortunate and those in struggle. And I think that's why we need to find other ways to bring people together, to celebrate class, to celebrate past struggles, and to celebrate wins, something that we don't do very well. And we need to continue to learn from each other. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. That's why we have to use different methods to engage with different groups. And I think providing a platform like this for people to share their lived experience is really, really important. And I for one would like to see much more of it. And as part of the Workers' Economy team, we really do love being part of these local communities. I think we've adopted quite a few communities as our own, from Port Talbot to Corby to Sheffield. And we've really, really loved getting to know the people that live and work in these towns and cities. But we need to get involved in our local networks, continue to get involved in our local networks, and to reach people that we don't meet at work, that we don't meet through our trade union connections, as I said earlier. And people that sometimes feel that they're political bystanders, that maybe feel they're a bit let down by the system. It's ever adapting, and I'm sure it'll continue to adapt. It's ever changing, and I'm not an expert by any means. I'm still learning about climate justice. I'm still learning about a fair transition from colleagues and comrades. And that's why it's an absolute privilege to be here tonight. As Jason said as well, I'll take any questions at the end. And I'd just like to thank you all for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. And I do agree with you that there is so much more we can do in building a movement that bring together workers and their unions, communities, and the climate justice movement. It's absolutely the crucial time that we need to do it. And actually, what's better to move towards this conversation with our next speaker, Jan, with a local resident of Port Talbot with family ties to the steelworks. She's also a frontline support worker and active with XR Cymru. So I'm really pleased that Jan is with us tonight, and we'd like to hear from you when you're ready, Jan.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Clara. Thanks, everybody. Some really interesting points there put forward by Jason and Claire already. I don't know what I can add to it really, other than I'm going to speak a little bit from a little bit of a personal perspective, really, I suppose. So I've lived in Talbot for over 40 years now, became active in the climate movement around 4 to 5 years ago. I've got family members who work in the steelworks, so both of my children work there. You know, my daughter and her partner work there, my son works there, my brother works there, and I've got lots and lots of friends who work there as well. And I've been kind of anticipating, you know, knowing from being involved in the climate movement that, you know, decarbonisation was on the cards in Port Talbot, and I've been kind of waiting to see what that actually looked like. And I think not even I expected when the announcement came that this would this transition would be so unfair to our communities, to our workers. You know, so all I can remember of the day, it was quite a devastating day, and there was quite the atmosphere in Port Talbot. I don't think any of us could quite believe what the announcement was, you know. So from a personal perspective, I think it's really important that the climate movement and unions and working class people now come together to tackle these issues, you know, of big companies and our governments completely walking over working people, leaving communities devastated. I did at the beginning of March. I organised a People's Assembly. So with Extinction Rebellion, one of our third demands is citizens' assemblies and people's assemblies, where we bring people's voices actually to challenge the government on decisions that are being made. So I've been trying to build some kind of community kind of action group here, but it's a little bit difficult at the moment because there's lots of different views and opinions. People, as Claire said, are divided, or, you know, so a lot of people don't really quite know which way to turn or how to organise on this. So I just really wanted to try and open up a community space for local people to come in, and it was called What's Your Problem? And we invited lots of people in, and only 5 people turned up actually. Well, no, sorry, it was about 10. But we retained 5 of those people, and we're working as a little group now to grow that movement, because I feel the community needs to get involved in this conversation, and the climate movement needs to get involved in the unions. We all need to come together to really tackle this as one, really, because divided, you know, we're less powerful. Whereas if we all come together, we're all fighting for the same cause. This will leave Port Talbot devastated. It's already quite difficult here. I am a frontline support worker, as Clara's already said. Services are already stretched here. Housing stretched. Mental health services are stretched. Substance misuse services are stretched. I work in frontline domestic violence services. We're stretched, you know. And everybody, I'm talking to social workers, I'm talking to housing officers, I'm talking to lots of other people in different agencies, and everybody is concerned about the impact of these closures, the impact of what's going to happen at Tata Steel, and these 3,000 people potentially losing their jobs. And we know it's going to have a huge impact with up to 10,000 people in the surrounding areas. It's going to affect local businesses. So I just want to echo everything that you're saying. And I think for us, without there is no social justice, there's no climate justice without social justice. That's a really big thing that we talk about in XR. And I think particularly as a working class rebel, you know, I feel very strongly that the climate movement should be getting on board and should be supporting local people, working class people, to fight these big corporations and the UK government. As Jason said, the fact that they've paid, you know, they've given 500 million with no kind of caveat of, you know, it's just like, there you go, you spend it as you will. And also I read somewhere last week the transition board of 100 million, which by the way is not going to touch the sides in Port Talbot, and the working people will never see it. I can guarantee you that. They've had about 2 meetings at the moment. That's probably gone out of the window now because Michael Gove was heading that up. So, you know, I think this is an opportunity. Even though last week the announcement was devastating, this is an opportunity for us to continue to move forward, to keep demanding more, and to keep working together for a just transition here in Port Talbot. I looked it up. What you know, sometimes you're trying to explain it to people. Well, what does a just transition mean, even? And I kind of found, you know, looked into it, and apparently, you know, it was coined in the trade union movement, and it's about as we transition to, you know, greener energies, greener technologies, nobody gets left behind. This town is being left behind. This town will be devastated, and its workforce with it. So I feel very strongly, as I said, social justice, climate justice go hand in hand, and I really hope tonight we can start to move towards those movements coming together, to create some real opposition for what's going on in here in Port Talbot. And I'm going to leave that there for a second.
Thanks so much, Jan, for giving a local community perspective into this, and for your important contribution. And I'm sure that a number of us want to work with you and the workers at the steelworks to bring those two movements together. And hopefully this meeting is a step in that direction. So looking forward to work with you a little bit more. I'm going to bring the next speaker in now, but I'm just going to make couple of quick points as the facilitator. I see, like, we keep repeating the comparison between what's happening with the steelworks now and the coal miners in the 80s. And I think we need to be slightly wary of this comparison, because let's be clear, the coal miners in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher and the Tories wanted to destroy the unions and the coal miners. We were one of the most unionized and strongest force in this country. It had nothing to do with transition. There was no promise of transition, and it was about breaking the coal miners and their unions. So it's a slightly different sort of combination, although the effect of the closures will lead to similar terrible conditions for workers and their communities. So I think let's bear that in mind. And I think it was interesting what Jan said about just transition and what is it. We're just like banding it around, and now it's being, captured by the industry and capitalists, and everybody talking about this just transition, which isn't just, in fact. I will share in the chat a training we ran a few months back as the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus about what is a just transition. And yes, it was brought back on the agenda by the trade union movement, in the last 10 years, but actually it was inspired from demands from campaigners in the global south against colonization, who looked at how it was unfair that, the global north had accumulated so much wealth on the back of the colonies and the people in the global south, as well as on the back of workers in the global north. And so I think it's, inspiring that we can sort of bring together those movements. I also see that Claire has shared, the link to the workers' plan for Port Talbot. We will make sure that the links shared in the chat, are circulated to participants afterwards. And I am now going to bring our next speaker, because I think we don't have to agree on everything, by the way, about this. This is about having the dialogue and exploring our ideas. Our enemies are trying to divide us, and jobs is a key tool that the politicians have used to divide us. If you remember fracking, we were told it will bring 70,000 jobs. Why will you be against jobs? But, in the end, we saw through those lies and this exaggeration of figures, and we saw that it wasn't the type of jobs that we wanted. And now they're trying to sell us a new coal mine in Cumbria on the back of jobs for a community that is facing deprivation. But, we want jobs for the future. We want jobs for our communities that are going to last, not going to kill our communities. So I'm going to bring Ellen Robottom in next. Ellen, longtime comrade from Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group and one of the authors of the Climate Jobs pamphlet. So Ellen you are next.
Oh, thanks, thanks, Clara, and thanks for making those two really important points. It's frustrating that we've got so little time with so much to talk about. You know, the three speakers that have just gone, I've just found it so interesting. I'm definitely going to listen back through this, you know, again another day, because there's so much information. So thanks all of you, and I've been really particularly kind of affected by the talk of, you know, the community work, because in the past I've done loads of community work around housing and benefits and that sort of thing, and you know, I'm just realizing how much I'm kind of missing that side of things and wanting to bring it all back together. So thank you. And of course, I want to start by extending solidarity to everybody that's been affected by this shocking announcement, the abrupt closure of the blast furnaces at Port Talbot, and you know, and how disgusted I am at the company's refusal to continue negotiating around a workers' plan to transition to green steel making in a way that protects livelihoods and offers long-term certainty to the workers. So I'm part of the Campaign Against Climate Change trade union group, and we are absolutely clear that the struggle to limit climate change is a class struggle, a workers' struggle, for three reasons, I guess. Firstly, the engine of climate change and the roadblocks that are preventing the solutions is the same ruthless drive for profits that exploits workers' labour and then discards them and spits them out when it suits. Secondly, because it is the workers and their communities that will bear the brunt of climate change, the lost livelihoods, the flooded homes, the food scarcity, the heat-related deaths, the terrible worries about the future facing our children. And thirdly, because it's only our labour that can build the better and safer future that we need. So that's why we focus our efforts on showing the huge amount of work that actually needs to be done to control climate change, and campaigning for policies that create and enable those urgently needed climate jobs, because we know those jobs are not going to fall into our laps. We know that a boss's transition to green technologies will just be another excuse to shed workers without a plan for redeployment, to introduce poorer pay and conditions in the new sectors, and to grab new subsidies at the public expense without any guarantee that they'll deliver public good. I know that people have already covered a lot of this stuff, but it bears repeating. Yeah, obviously this description sounds familiar. After all, if Tata was really concerned about speeding up the transition to green steel making, they'd be employing people right now to start work on a direct reduction of iron facility, instead of offshoring those emissions by wanting to move production elsewhere. So it's a workers' plan that we need, as we've all said, and that can bring behind it the mass support that's needed to make it a reality, both within the trade unions, in communities, and more broadly in the wider climate justice movement. The Unite Workers Plan for Port Talbot, I think, is an exciting start, and we're really looking forward to seeing it developed and seeing more detail. Well, I am for sure. A great thing about the plan, I think, is that it looks beyond what happens on the site itself and explores the potential for creating those thousands more skilled jobs in the wider transition in the region, as already mentioned by Jason and Claire. That jobs that are either going to require steel or are needed themselves for steel production. I mean, having said that, electric arc furnaces also have synergies with other sectors that provide jobs on site. For instance, better steel recycling means more copper reclaimed for use in electrical cables. We're going to need tons of that. The heat produced by electric arc furnaces can also meet another big decarbonisation challenge, which is the recycling of concrete. I think that's in the workers mentioned in the workers plan, the Unite Workers Plan. So this sort of wider view, I think, is really essential, because actually there's no such thing as a transition confined to one site or one industry on its own. It's all interconnected. For example, the shift to electric arc furnaces and direct reduction of iron facilities obviously needs a huge increase in renewably produced electricity, especially if green hydrogen's used as a reducing agent. This in turn means a vast expansion of grid capacity, manufacture of turbine parts, specialist ships and road vehicles to transport them, etc. But at the same time, there's already a critical UK-wide shortage of skilled electrical engineers, and there'll be a need for many more trained technical engineering and construction workers. This is the perversity of the chaos of the market when you don't have things properly planned. Whilst electric arc furnaces and direct reduction of iron facilities do, in fact, both require far less labour per unit of steel produced than blast furnaces, this is far outweighed by the additional skilled labour that will be required beyond the site for all these extra new things that are needed, or things that need to be expanded. So in the shorter term, we've got absolutely no option but to demand that the blast furnaces stay open until there's a guarantee of redeployment at protected pay and conditions, retraining wherever needed, and I would say a furlough scheme to support workers through any gaps in their employment that occur due to technological changes. And that is a demand that's also being made by the North Sea offshore workers that are looking at what's going to happen in the transition to renewables as well. But if we're not to see this really catastrophic threat to jobs repeated in one sector after another, as I think it's already been said, we absolutely need to swap the chaos and the waste of the market for joined up, worker-led, democratic planning for a fair transition away from fossil fuels, ideally with white public ownership. And that is it might seem like an impossible challenge, but I think it's one that we all can get behind, and we all need to get behind, because it's going to need a genuine mass movement to actually make it a reality. And I think just to finish there, that just what Clara said about the way that the government, industry, powers that be are really trying to drive a wedge within the working class by positing climate and jobs as being opposed. It's not transitioning that is causing these cliff edge jobs threats. It's as being said, obviously, the behaviour of the economic system, it's the behaviour of the government, the behaviour of the industry, the lack of this joined up worker-centred planning. So I feel like we're starting to move towards that. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Ellen, for your insights and all the work you are doing in looking into the details of how do we transition and how we link different sectors together. We can't just have slogan about demanding a just transition. We need to actually put the flesh on the bones, and it's good to see that Unite is moving in these directions, and I'm hoping that there's going to be more dialogue with the climate justice movement, so we can improve those plans in other sectors as well. You've just mentioned the oil and gas workers. We know that the closure of Grangemouth has been announced, and a lot of us want to link up with those workers to support them in their campaign. So thanks for your contribution. I know you may have to leave because I think you've been invited in Bradford Trades Council as well for something else. But it was great to have your vision, and I think I would recommend to people to look at the climate jobs strategy. It's a really important piece of work that give some more details about what do we mean by green jobs or climate jobs, because unfortunately I do hear. What is a green job? A delivery driver on an electric bike is not a green job, and we know that. I hope that my General Secretary Sharon will have a chance to watch this session, to look at a majority of the climate justice movement is actually behind workers for this just transition. And our next contribution is going to be from John Morrissey. I'm really pleased that John is a big activist in the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus. He's also from the local area because he's the branch chair in Swansea community branch and the environmental rep. So very important again to link communities and unions. So John, is you next. Thank you.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks, Clara. First of all, I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So I'll keep this pretty short. Our branch, Swansea branch, as of Unite Community, has been supporting the actions of the steelworkers over the months gone by in terms of street stalls, demos, etc. Whatever's gone on, somebody from Unite Community has been at those demos trying to support them in whatever way we can. And we fully support the actions of Unite members at the plant. Obviously, talking in branch, we obviously see the lack of true transition taking place. If we look at the initial discussions that took place on green steel and how they've progressed or not progressed, we've seen the total shutdown of the coke ovens, which come, or perhaps Jason could back me on this, but come as quite a shock for us in terms of the speed it happened. Also, the dates for the shutting down of the furnaces from our branch seem to have speeded up, and there's been no mention of a date, as far as we're aware, of when the arc furnaces are going to come into full production to take over steel production. We now see the urgent need for really green technologies to be at the forefront of steel making. But these opportunities also bring major opportunities for new green retraining. And we see this not just for steel workers, but the thousands, as Jason said, thousands upon thousands of subcontractors, support industries that supply the steelworks at the moment. It's a massive knock-on effect if we lose these blast furnaces the way they are going. It's not just the 2,800 plus steelworkers, it's going to be tremendous impact on the local community. So we see that there's a definite need for retraining into green industries as quickly as possible, and this needs to be put on the table now. You know, it's not replacing our steel production, it's to support it and to take it forward. So the opportunity is there for us to grab. We need high quality steel, is major importance to us, particularly on the green agenda. As been mentioned before, if we look at high quality steel, we need wind turbines, we need electric vehicles, we need good quality steel to produce these things. Rightly or wrongly, again, I look on Jason's expertise in this, but I was understanding that arc furnace technology uses recycled steel, so it will not produce good quality steel, which is being produced now. But I need clarification on that point. If we look at our steel industry at the moment, if we moved it abroad, if it goes abroad, for argument's sake, that's going to have an economic effect on our country. If we look at what happened with the energy crisis a few months ago when the Ukraine, or last year actually, when the Ukraine war broke out, being in the hands of external suppliers could very well affect us in our steel industry in the future. Who knows what's around the corner? We just don't know. So we need our own steel to support our stability of our economy, and not only that, is to look at the carbon footprint of importing steel from foreign countries. We need our own, certainly our own plants up and running as quickly as possible. As I say, most of it's been said what I was going to say. So where to? What I think I say. It's been mentioned. I think Jan mentioned about action groups. I certainly know that our branch wants to get involved more in local action groups, local community groups, and try and join these up in Port Talbot and surrounding areas. It's not just Port Talbot. This is going to affect us, workers from Swansea, Neath, Bridgend, the valleys. It's going to have a massive effect. So we need to come together, as Jan said, and be strong and to fight back wherever we can. So I'll basically wrap it up there, because most of it, what I was going to say, has been said. My two biggest fears is I'd like to know whether 500 million has been spent. What's it been spent on? Where's it gone? And also my other fear now is, and it's something that we need as a group really need to push, is we're in election mode. I think Port Talbot now has gone onto the back burner. It's been forgotten about because the two major parties, if you like, at the moment are just concerned about their getting into power again. And if you look at the news, if you look at anything at the moment, Port Talbot has dropped off the face of the earth. We need to get Port Talbot back up there and back on the agenda. I think I'll leave it there. I think, as I said, everything's been said, what I was going to say. I'll put my email address and contact details in the chat. So anybody in local groups want to come together or have a meeting and get something going locally, that would be great. Thanks all.
Thanks so much, John. And I'm sure that, some people is going to take you on that offer, and we will certainly give support from outside Wales to, facilitate the work of local groups and, for you to get support from outside the region as well. I'm going to bring our last contribution before we take a few questions. There have been a number of questions already in the chat. So, if you've got questions, this is your time. But after the next speaker, I'll bring questions from two people from Coal Action Network who have been doing some work around steel as well. So, Anne and Daniel, if after Morton, you can be ready to ask your question, that would be great. So yeah, our last speaker is Morton. Morton is from NEON, the New Economy Organisers Network, and they've been doing some work around just transition and how we do, build this mass movement for climate justice. So Morton, you're next. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for organising, Clara. And yeah, it's been so great hearing all the speakers, particularly Jason and Jan from Port Talbot, talk about the situation. Yeah, I'm working on a project that we're doing with the Trade Union Congress around what we talk about worker-led transitions rather than just transitions, because transitions aren't going to be just unless they're led by workers. The kind of work we're doing is across kind of manufacturing industries in the UK, with the kind of idea that actually what's happening in Port Talbot now could be happening 100 times over in other parts of the country in the next few years, because if we don't invest in the green transition and in supporting that transition across the country, a lot of jobs will be offshored. And a lot of works will be on the line. I think we've all sort of seen the kind of media narrative around jobs versus climate. It's climate action that kind of means that jobs will be going across the country. But actually, when you look at the situation in a lot of industry, the kind of thing is that, well, these transitions are happening, and a lot of places it will mean job losses, but it's not because of the new technology. It's because there's not the government support. It's because there's not the corporate investment in making sure that these transitions are actually happening in a way that protects the jobs. So the project I'm working on, we've got organisers around the country that goes out and supports union reps in workplaces to make plans for how they want the transition to happen, and for that to win those plans at those workplaces. My background, just to say, is working as a climate campaigner. I was working as a straight up climate campaigner for many years, and I think other people might have the same experience from the climate movement here, but it always felt like it was this sort of, you're fighting against people rather than fighting with people. And I think there's really an opportunity here, and particularly around Port Talbot, but up and down the country as well, in terms of there's such a shared interest in us all in terms of fighting for these transitions to happen in a good way. Because as Jason said, we need the steel to produce all the green stuff that we want to work on. But we also need to make sure that we fight alongside workers, because that's how we're going to actually push what's very likely an incoming Labour government in July to actually do good climate action. The climate movement is not going to win this by themselves, and neither are the workers. So I think that there's all the opportunity here for us to work together around these things. And I think Port Talbot should be at the very top of the list of what the climate movement are fighting for at the moment. Not just from like a moral point of view in terms of like supporting workers that are actually, you know, have the potential of being at the very sort of front of climate action in the UK, but also from a strategic point of view that like, if we don't work together on these things, we're just not going to win it. It's really great to see events like this, to see climate folks coming out in support of this. Jason, you might have more stuff to add on this, but I know there's been talk about industrial action coming up at Port Talbot. I think if, you know, that's a really crucial point for like real, you know, we're talking about how do we support workers in these kind of things. And I think when workers are actually campaigning and workers are taking action, that's the time to really come out and show support, turn up to picket lines if they're there, strike, you know, fundraise for strike funds, you know, turn up to rallies and events, push politicians you're in touch with, all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of like, it's quite easy for conversations like this to get very kind of like talking about we should all be working together around it. But actually, there's quite a lot of practical ways of getting involved around Port Talbot. And not to take up too much time, but just a little plug that organizing a webinar tomorrow, which is with some US climate organizers who got the US climate movement out in support of striking automotive workers over there. So hoping that there's some lessons from that can be learned around how we can support steel workers in Port Talbot and other workers that are that in some ways are on the front line of the climate fight. So I'm just going to share a little link about that. But yeah, really great to hear all the contributions.
Thank you so much, Martin. And we now got just under half an hour to, you know, hear some of the questions. And I guess, sorry, Jason, but many of them may be directed at you rather than the other speakers. And we'll see how that goes. No pressure, mates. I'm gonna take them in, you know, a couple of questions together as well, if that's okay. And I'm just gonna ask Daniel and Anne, maybe Daniel, if you're still here and you want to ask your question, and then Anne.
Yeah, absolutely. My question was to Jason. Jason, when you're chatting with your colleagues, where are they pointing the blame for what's facing Port Talbot Steelworks? Is it net zero? Is it the government? Is it Tata Steel? Is it environmentalists? Like who's getting blamed for this amongst your colleagues? Like, where do they see the cause of this?
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to take a second question as well, Jason, before I bring you back in. Anne, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much to all the speakers. It's been very useful. My question is also directed more specifically to Jason, and that's to ask whether the technology that should be used at Port Talbot to decarbonise is electric arc furnaces, or whether another sort of green steel would be a better use of resources and skills. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I mean, many of us wouldn't know which other green stick technology exists. So, but yeah, Jason, do you want to address or try to address those two questions?
Yeah. So with regards to the blame for the sort of situation we're in at the minute, in all honesty, it's very dynamic. There's a multitude of factors. Ultimately, Tata and the government are at the top of the triangle in that respect with regards to blame, because they are the ones who've been the custodians of the business, and they are the ones who've allowed us to get into the situation we're in with regards to the plant and the assets and everything, and the government being the custodians of the economy and not doing anything to really support the steel industry in recent times and going forward. So, but with regards to the workforce, I don't think they know who to blame, is the honest truth. It's certainly not each other. It's certainly not sort of action groups around or climate activists in that respect. And in all honesty, I was expecting a bit more sort of a ribbon tonight then from some of the climate activists, assuming that the steel industry is a dirty sort of fossil fuel industry and it needs to go, and it's refreshing to see that hasn't been the case. because, like I said, the steel industry is quite integral to the future of this country being or having a green economy. With regards to the EAF, the electric arc furnace being the best option with regards to technology going forward, the reasons for that is the sort of availability with commodities in this country. If you look at other countries across the world, so America is a good example where 70% of the steel they produce is produced using electric arc furnaces. Where if you go to the other side of the world and look at Australia, then they've effectively gone away from electric arc furnace technology or aren't developing that because they've got such an abundance of the raw materials, commodities you need to cheaply run a blast furnace. Ultimately, for us in this country, it's come down to commodities and cost. So, yeah, the electric arc furnace is the cheapest option for us to be able to produce steel. It is steel recycling. It's not steel in its raw material form, or virgin steel as it's been termed from like from a blast furnace. But to answer a previous question that was asked at the same time then, with regards to the quality of the electric arc furnace steel, effectively it's a little bit of you get out what you put in. So if you put good quality steel in, you'll get good quality steel out. But there's also the option, DRI was mentioned earlier, direct reduced iron. So if we put sort of high grade iron pellets into the mix, then we can change the sort of properties of the steel that comes out of the electric arc furnace. And that's another way to get the higher quality steel. There's also technologies around how we power it, whether it is with pure electric or if we use gas or if we use hydrogen, or there's lots of options, but these are all further down the line because we haven't got that availability to us yet.
Thanks so much for this clarity, Jason. That's great. I had a couple of questions in the chat that may be linked by the sort of like globalization and other countries' contributions. So I'm just going to read them now. But Annie was asking earlier on, can you explain to us, Jason, why Holland and India are privileged against Britain? I think she meant in terms of like bringing the steels on or investments in steel. Hopefully that question makes sense to you. And then there was a question from Elaine. Ellen was told that Britain is accepting steel from China. Is that true? Do you want to take those two?
Yes, so with regards to the Holland and India bit, ultimately Tata are an Indian-based company. They're looking after their own in that respect with regards to the steel industry in India. They are they're seeing a massive increase in demand for steel in India, and they're looking to meet that demand, which is why there's been so much investment in their home turf, so to speak. Holland, as another example, we've always been like the poor relation when compared to Holland, because they've seen massive investment in their site compared to us in Port Talbot. And that's purely and simply down to the government. So our government don't necessarily push or incentivize Tata to, and it's not just a case of Tata, it's a case with many, many business owners across many industries. But they don't sort of look for the employers to invest in UK industry. Where the Dutch government have, they've massively supported Tata and massively sought to secure better investment for the Imoyden plant in particular. Sorry, Clara, what was the second question?
It was Elaine saying, was told Britain was accepting steel from China. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. There was a time when China were flooding the market with cheap steel. It was a few years back now, but it wasn't just a UK thing. It was effectively a world thing. The Chinese government had sort of subsidized their home industry to the tune of about $11 billion, and were flooding the market then with this subsidized steel because they could make it so cheaply. But it was right across Europe in particular. I'm not sure if they're still doing it.
Thanks so much for that. got a few other questions that I've gone through. Maybe coming back more to unions and, you know, industrial action. There was I'm going to take two again. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jason.
That's fine. It's fine. I'll make notes.
I think that they're like more directed to you. Obviously, I will ask the other speakers in a little bit if they want to come back in any of those points. But so there was a question from Ken who said, there was an emergency motion at the Wales TUC Congress. The three steel unions, you know, Unite being one, Community and GMB, put it forward. Why is it so weak in action? You know, you're getting support from Wales TUC. It's, you know, is there like support there? And then the second question that come from Tyrone, and you know, I wanted to ask this question as well. So you know, maybe I'll sort of like ponder it. But there is a question about what upcoming industrial action is coming up, you know, as industrial action and balloting for it being hampered by the anti-trade union laws. I mean, obviously, we don't expect you to give us the notice of the strike action, and I guess you can't like tell us all the details, but you know, maybe indication as well about in relation to the election. Do you think this is going to come soon? So, Welsh TUC and industrial action.
Right. So the Wales TUC bit and the emergency motion, yeah. The reason, and I agree completely that the action has been weak up until this point. The truth is we've been trying to, or my perspective on it in that respect, and I should add, is that we've been trying to align the three unions together in a sort of joined up approach in action and fighting, because we'd be stronger and more effective in that format. That hasn't happened. It has failed at every sort of hurdle we've met, and yeah, it's fallen apart. So where we go with that is another question. I've argued for months now that the multi-union is the term around it. That shouldn't be holding us back in fighting to represent our members or best represent our members in that respect, and that we should forge ahead and do all we can to protect their livelihoods. So yeah, that leads on to the second question in that respect then, with regards to action coming up. We had a meeting earlier today, funnily enough, and we agreed that we will be putting notice into the employer imminently. So that should be going in this week. With a view to taking industrial action. So what I tried to propose was that it would better suit the membership if we went for industrial action in a sort of escalatory fashion, rather than jumping feet first straight in at the deep end and going all out strike. That we'd be better doing a sort of overtime ban, work to rule type format. So that's being drafted up at the minute, and yeah, we'll be agreeing that this week and serving notice to the company later this week, or that's the current plan. You mentioned as a little bit as well, Clara, about the general election being announced, and obviously the one of the things we've been fighting for is to try to get the business to hold off in closing the blast furnaces until after a general election. And then Rishi came and gifted us last week the announcement of a general election in July, which will be before the closure of the second blast furnace in September this year. We have got, it has presented us a fabulous opportunity in that respect to get the politicians on side, to get the politicians to sort of reiterate the steel pledges, to show their support around the steel constituencies up and down the country, that they are serious about the steel industry, that they are serious about the green economy and the opportunities going forward, and more importantly, representing the workforce because they are their constituents. I actually met with one of our Senedd members, the Assembly members, in Neath last week, and he was massively supportive. Clara, I've actually sent you a link to the newspaper article that he put out over the weekend. I don't know if you want to share that to the group later or whatever, but yeah, he's massively supportive of the steel industry and understands completely that, I mean, the opportunity that is in front of us and what is required of our politicians.
Thank you, Jason, for that. That's great. And yeah, I'll make sure that the article is shared with the participants afterwards. I'm not going to take people raising their hands, I'm afraid. This is, in favor of time. So if you do have a question, please do type it in the chat. And I've got a couple more that have come through. And then maybe we'll just also keep a little bit of time for the other speakers to come back and to think about, what's next steps. So, the other speakers, if you can bear in mind, if you want to come back on any of the points, but also, what do you think we should do next? Because I think that it's great to discuss the situation, but we also want to start seriously planning about how we're going to support this industrial action and, how we can mobilize more widely the climate justice movements. And so I had, and Jason, you dealing with those two questions at once brilliantly, sorry if other people get slightly confused. But there is two more questions that have come through. So, first of all, there was one from Marcus, and Marcus, said, just transition is a key issue in achieving net zero. But if people think that a transition in the sector mean that they are thrown on the scrap heap, are they likely to push back against the changes that we know we desperately need? So is that, a danger that may happen? And then the second question is from Sasha. It was asking about, again, international connection. Do you have any connection with union in India, in particular with the Tata Group?
Right, so the second one first, because that's easiest. No, I don't know if our sort of wider organizing committee or people at different levels in union have got any sort of contacts with unions in India. Yes, so I'm not sure on that. As I said, I am just an electrical engineer in the hot mill and a workplace rep. I'm supposed to be represented locally in the hot mill. With regards to the jobs on the scrap heap bit, I'm not sure. Like I said, the just transition bit is one of those phrases that have been, as we mentioned earlier, it's been around a long time. For us, it's about getting the having so even if the jobs or the job losses that have been proposed for Port Talbot come to fruition, that there's other opportunity around the area. So I mentioned when I spoke earlier about the Freeport area that's been set up around Port Talbot. There's massive opportunity there with regards to the green economy jobs that we've been speaking about. With regards to, electric vehicle battery plants, with regards to solar power generation, with regards to the wind turbine manufacture or the floating offshore wind platforms. There's massive opportunity, and for us, the transition, rather than sort of seeing it as the government throwing jobs on the scrap heap, with the right support, then it doesn't have to be. It can be that we've created these alternative, well-paid, highly skilled jobs to offset the job losses we're seeing in Tata. But as I mentioned, that needs to be now. That can't be, in 5 or 6 years' time. One of the points that was mentioned earlier, I think it was John mentioned around the timeline. The EAF is planned to be brought online 2027, early 2028. So yeah, it needs to be now. It's no good being after that date. It's the jobs are already gone by then.
Brilliant, thanks, Jason. And I'm gonna now bring some of the other speakers. But, let's really try to focus about next steps. And I think there is a number of ideas emerging already. Some people have been discussing the technology. I've shared, some briefing by Campaign Against Climate Change, and I've shared some stuff by Coal Action Network. There are clearly people who are keen to have those conversations, and it seems that a follow-up for those interested to explore in more details of technologies, long-term solutions, possibly for other sites, etc., is something that we could follow up on. Also, the free ports have been mentioned a number of times by Jason and also a few people in the chat. It is actually one of the next sessions that the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus wants to explore with some of our port workers, and Unite has got a campaign around free ports as well. So that's certainly something that we will put together. Then there is a strand about local community organizing, and John and John, have, I think, put their emails in the chat. We'll make sure that this is available to participants to link up and build up, the force locally. There was also a really interesting point, I think, from Holly, talking about, the workers' co-op movement might be a very important practical steps for us to start thinking about when those employers are throwing workers on the scrap heap. What is the answer? Can we, organize a response from a workers' cooperative perspective? And people in the chat have mentioned our comrades from the ex-GKN plant in Italy, where automotive workers who have been dismissed almost 3 years ago actually started to occupy their factory and are still occupying it. And they've moved themselves into a workers' cooperative. We're designing an alternative plan to move the production towards cargo bike and solar panel. And that's certainly another conversation that will be interesting to explore. So we're coming towards the end of our rally. I'd love to stay for another 3 hours, to be fair, but I'm sure that we all also want to, have a bit of a rest this evening. So I'm gonna ask each of our contributors to come back if they want. You don't have to, but was there anything that resonates in particular with you that you wanted to come back on, or any idea that you have got moving forward? And maybe I'll start. I don't know. I think some of our speakers may have left, so I'll just check. Ellen is not here anymore. And I think Claire may have had to shoot off as well. Is that correct? If not, just unmute yourself. Okay. Yeah, so we've only got a few left. So, Morten, did you have any additional points or move forward that you wanted to mention? I know you've been working on an open letter as well from the climate justice movement. So Morten, I'll bring you back first.
Yeah, I mean, keen to chat to anyone around who is interested in doing more sort of just transition work. Just no particular thoughts, but just like, thanks so much for organizing this. And I think it's really like crucial that, when we hear about industrial action in Port Talbot, that we actually like get boots on the ground. I know it's like a busy time for people with election and stuff, but like if we can make this part of the election, then we've all got stuff to win from that. I'll put my email in the chat as well, in case people want to get in touch.
Brilliant, brilliant. And please, everybody, keep your eyes peeled for the open letter that will be published at some stage in the appropriate moments, and help us to amplify it. I'll ask John next if you wanna. Have you got anything to add or any suggestion you'd like to take forward?
I think what I'd like to take forward is joining up with the groups. Like Jan said, like community will fit in with whoever. But more important, having that contact with Jason for us to know what we can do outside of the steelworks to support the people there and also the local community, particularly, as I say, subcontractors and that, which, no disrespect to the steelworkers, but the steelworkers will get their redundancy payment or whatever packages, but there's a lot of one-man bands out there, contractors who was going to need support, and I think we need to have the infrastructure in Port Talbot to support those people.
Absolutely. No, that's an important point. Okay, John, I'm sure you're buzzing with idea, and hopefully it's been useful connections tonight as well. I can see lots of people want to connect with you and John. So, is there like any comments you wanted to make on what's been said, and also any like ideas forward that you got?
No, I think it's just been really interesting and beneficial, really, to bring all these people together and to share ideas and share connections the way we have. I think, probably as a climate activist, I'm quite isolated in Port Talbot, so it's lovely to see other groups here, and I think, you know, working together is the way forward. And I think if we can get something with similar energy, similar speakers, things like that on the ground here in Port Talbot, as Morton said, get out there, support the steel workers, get on the picket lines, do whatever they need to be supported. But if we're all speaking together and we're all talking together, and we need to engage the community and get them involved, then we can grow something. You know, and this has been really encouraging this evening. It's just been fantastic to have you all here, and thank you, Clara, and thank you to everybody else that has spoken tonight.
Brilliant, thank you, Jan. So I think like that was all of our other speakers have had a chance to, you know, maybe react. And I mean, Jason, any sort of last words or any last thoughts that you've got about tonight's session? Hopefully you found it useful and, you know, find new allies.
Absolutely, as I mentioned, it's been outstanding. I was expecting a bit of a, as I said, a bit of a ribbon from some. Like I said, it goes with the territory, doesn't it? It's one of those things that, like I said, people say climate activists, and automatically you think, I mean, blockades and I mean causing disruption and I mean sort of all the stuff we see in the media. And I think that's the key here. I think that's the image that's been painted of climate activists. So groups like this coming together and sort of showing allegiance and fighting together and showing that they understand that there's more complexities around situations like this, rather than it is just a dirty fossil-filled industry. That it needs that, as we've said, just transition. It's outstanding, and this is exactly what we need.
Brilliant. Well, I'm really glad that, you know, that's one of your conclusions, because obviously a lot of climate activists are actually workers and are involved in their unions and involved in their local communities. A lot of us are rowing for more contact with workers in those industries. And I think that, speaking from experience, from somebody who has been a trade unionist and a climate activist for 15 years almost, I find that often sometimes the, you know, sort of bureaucratic side of our unions are stopping that direct dialogue. And there is nothing better in actually, you know, being able to share a pint or a cup of tea and having those chats, rather than, you know, having them online or
well, that's exactly what we did in Manchester, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So we are gonna keep an eye out on this notice for industrial action to see, you know, what shape and form and timing it's coming up, because a number of us are really keen to, you know, maybe on one particular day when you're out on strike, we may be able to make a particular call to climate justice group to come and show this solidarity. So, you know, colleagues and people in the local community can, you know, sort of like shake off this idea that, you know, climate activists don't care about workers. But also, I can tell you, and, you know, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure for others, at some stage is, you know, there is a serious need for some people to, you know, occupy some towers or, you know, a factory. I'm sure that, you know, there'll be a queue waiting to help you with that. And we've got some people who are, you know, seriously, you know, taking risks, because they really do believe that the climate crisis is already happening. And we also believe that, you know, the poorest people and the working class communities and the people in the global south are on the front line of this climate crisis. The rich people are going to be okay. You know, they're going to have their gated communities, their own energy production and water production. It is, you know, the ordinary, the working class people and people in the global south that are going to left behind. So this is time that we up our fight. We start to be serious, and, you know, we convince the rest of the trade union movement that climate justice is a trade union issue. We want the coal miners or the former coal mining communities on board. We want the oil and gas workers on board. We want the automotive sector and the aerospace sectors on board. And that's how we will be able to win. So thank you so much, everybody, for your presence tonight. The recording will be shared. Please share it widely, especially in your trades councils and your union branches, but also in your climate justice groups. We will circulate, you know, some of the comments and some of the links that have been shared tonight and some of the initial ideas we've got for the next steps. So we will be in touch. This is only the start. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Solidarity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clara. Thanks, Jason, and thanks
Thanks so
everyone.
much, Clara.
Thanks, Clara, Jason, and all. Brilliant.
Yes, thanks everyone. We just go.
Yeah.